Okay, so I am now going to be reading the timeline of the Civil War, and that's going to be important for our story so that you can recognize it. So the timeline is as follows. On September 18th, 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law was passed by the United States Congress as part of the compromise between the southern slaveholding states and the northern states. The law allowed slave hunters to seize alleged fugitive slaves without due process of law and prohibited anyone from aiding escaped fugitives or obstructing their recovery. On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States, the first Republican, defeating opponents Stephen A. Douglas, John C. Breckinridge of Southern Democrats, and John Bell of the new Constitutional Union Party. On December 20th, 1860, in response to Abraham Lincoln's election as President of the United States, a special session of the South Carolina legislature convened and voted unanimously to secede from the Union. On January 3rd, 1861, the Delaware State Legislature officially and overwhelmingly rejected a proposal to leave the Union and join the Confederacy. There was little expectation that Delaware would vote to secede. Of the 20,000 blacks who lived there, only 1,800 were enslaved. On January 9th, 1861, the Star of the West, an unarmed merchant steamer chartered by the War Department to transport troops and supplies from New York City to Fort Sumner in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, was fired upon and driven off by South Carolina. On January 9th, 1861, the state of Mississippi became the second state to leave the Union. On January 10th, 1861, Florida voted to secede. On January 11th, 1861, Alabama voted to secede from the Union. On January 18th, 1861, in reaction to the secession of the southern states, Massachusetts offered President Lincoln such aid in men and money as he may request to maintain the authority of the general government. On January 19th, 1861, Georgia became the fifth state to secede from the Union. On January 26, 1861, the Louisiana legislature voted to withdraw from the Union. On January 29, 1861, the state of Kansas entered the Union as a free state, its constitution prohibiting slavery. On February 1st, 1861, Montgomery, Alabama was chosen capital of the Confederate States of America. The capital would move to Richmond on May 20th after Virginia joined the Confederacy. On February 1st, 1861, Texas seceded. On February 11th, 1861, President-elect Abraham Lincoln began his 12-day journey to Washington, D.C. to assume the presidency. It was from the Great Western Railroad Depot in Springfield, Illinois, that he gave one of his most touching speeches. On February 18, 1861, Jefferson Davis was appointed the first provisional president of the Confederate States of America. On March 4th, 1861, Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th President of the United States. In his address, he spoke to rebellious Southerners. "In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors." On March 21st, 1861, Confederate leaders were eager to emphasize the irreconcilable differences between North and South. Vice President Alexander Stephens delivered an impassioned speech stating, "Our new government is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and moral condition." On April 12th through the 13th, 1861, Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, was attacked by artillery. After exchanging fire for 34 hours, the fort surrendered. The bombardment of Fort Sumter marked the beginning of the American Civil War. On April 15th, 1861, President Lincoln issued a proclamation of war and a call for volunteers to suppress the rebellion. On April 17th, 1861, Virginia secedes. On April 19th, 1861, the 6th Massachusetts Regiment was attacked by a mob of pro-Southern advocates while marching through Baltimore. On April 29th, 1861, Maryland rejected secession. On May 6th, 1861, Arkansas seceded from the Union. On May 16, 1861, the Kentucky General Assembly enacted a Declaration of Neutrality. On May 23, 1861, in the evening, as Confederate sympathizers celebrated Virginia's decision to secede, 3 male slaves, Frank Baker, James Townsend, and Shep Mallory, rowed a small boat across the James River to Fort Monroe, one of the only Union-controlled outposts in the South, surrendering themselves for having given aid to the rebels. On May 24, 1861, General Butler refused to return the runaways, declaring them contraband of war. As Virginia was now a foreign country, he had no obligation to return the men. Word spread rapidly, and within days, dozens, then hundreds of more runaways appeared at the gates seeking safety. On May 29, 1861, Richmond, Virginia became the Confederate capital. On June 8, 1861, Tennessee voted to secede. On June 18, 1861, President Lincoln signed legislation authorizing the United States Sanitary Commission, the relief agency created to provide care for the sick and wounded of the war. On July 17, 1861, the United States government started issuing paper money. On August 6, 1861, Lincoln signed the first Confiscation Act. Congress authorized Union forces to confiscate slaves used against the government, legitimizing General Benjamin Butler's policy of designated runaway slaves as contraband of war. On August 7, 1861, Confederate soldiers set fire to the city of Hampton, Virginia, burning it to the ground so that it would not fall into the hands of the enemy. On September 3, 1861, Reverend Lewis C. Lockwood of the American Missionary Association became the first missionary to the freedmen at Fort Monroe. He made arrangements for weekday and Sabbath meetings and organized weekday and evening schools. On September 17, 1861, Mary S. Peake held her first class at Fort Monroe. On December 1, 1861, a bill was introduced in Congress to end slavery in the District of Columbia. On December 10, 1861, Kentucky was accepted as the 13th Confederate state. On February 22, 1862, Mary S. Peake died of tuberculosis. Her tombstone reads, "The first teacher of the freedmen at Fortress Monroe, Virginia." On March 13, 1862, Congress prohibited the return of fugitive slaves. On April 10, 1862, President Lincoln requested that Congress pass a resolution to offer any slave state compensation from the federal government in return for enacting a bill of gradual emancipation. On April 16, 1862, President Lincoln signed into law the District of Columbia Compensated Emancipation Act. It freed all slaves within the capital and paid every slaveholder $300 for each slave. On May 20th, 1862, the Homestead Act of 1862 was signed by President Lincoln. On June 19, 1862, Congress outlawed slavery in all territories belonging to the United States of America. On July 17, 1862, Congress passed the Militia Act of 1862, declaring that African Americans could be utilized by the United States Army and Navy. On July 17, 1862, Congress passed the Second Confiscation Act, decreeing that any Confederate official whose land was occupied by the Union who did not surrender within 60 days would have his slaves freed. On September 22, 1862, President Lincoln issued the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in active rebellion states would be freed if said states didn't end their fighting and rejoin the Union by January 1st, 1863. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln signed the executive order known as the Emancipation Proclamation. He would later call it the great event of the 19th century. So that was our background information about the Civil War, which is important to know for the story. And the next recording you hear will be of me reading Chapter 1, The World as Callie Knew It.